Ninth round pick, 271 overall back in 2003. That say much to you? It should. Because after 17 seasons in the National Hockey League, he's hanging up his skates and saying goodbye to the game he loves. We're going to look back at the career of Jaroslav Halak. Hey everyone, Costa from Montreal Hockey Talk, and we take a look back at the career of Jaroslav Halak. There's a lot to say about Jaro. You know, he never was flamboyant, never flashy, but one hell of a goaltender. Honestly, people here in Montreal were of two minds when it came to Halak. As we look at the 2010 playoff run and some of the highlights from that series against the Washington Capitals. People are still wonder to this day, 15 years later, whether or not the Montreal Canadiens made the right decision by getting rid of him and not holding on to Carey Price. And if you remember back in the day, they traded Jaroslav Halak in order to get Lars Eller. They were looking for some strength at center. Eller, Dutch-born, strong kid, second-round pick. It was a good trade-off for the Canadiens, they thought. At the end of the day, was it a mistake? Nobody really knows. Hindsight is 20/20. But I'd like you to put it in the comments and let me know what you think about that decision to keep Price over Halak. But let's go back and take a look at Halak's journey as a whole. Starting in 2003 when the Canadiens drafted him, like I said, in the 9th round, 271st overall. You hear that and you think to yourself, 9th round? Of course, there is no 9th round anymore, right? They abolished that years ago. But 9th round, it's not going to amount to much. He'll be a journeyman, maybe play a couple of years in the AHL. Nothing more than that. But there was one thing that the Canadiens knew about Jaroslav Halak is that he overachieved at every level. And they were counting him on him overachieving in order to become better and better and possibly become that diamond in the rough that every team looks for in the draft. And he didn't disappoint. In 2004, he came across the Atlantic to come play for the Lewiston Maniacs of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, now, of course, known as the Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League. And I'm never going to get used to saying that, by the way. So if I screw it up time and time again through this show, I apologize dearly. I'll try to use the letters only. But in saying that, he spent that 2004-2005 with Lewiston, and he posted a .920 save percentage. Pretty good for a guy who was getting adjusted to smaller rinks, right? He played on the big European rinks throughout his career in Slovakia. And then in Lewiston, he ended up meeting his longtime goalie coach, my friend, who I work with at D-Skate, and will be the goalie coach for the Le Sommet International Hockey Academy and the Hawkesbury Hawks of the USPHL Premier League, Marc Champagne. And Marc said about Jaro, he was never flashy. He was quiet, precise, and intense. From day one, he had that mindset of a pro. Nothing rattled him. You could tell that he had that inner fire, even back then. And that's all you could really ask for, the drive. For a guy who wasn't expected to do much, you wanted to see him try to succeed. And he did, in droves. After that 2004-2005 season, he went to the Hamilton Bulldogs. Spent a year and a half with the then affiliate of the Montreal Canadiens. And in the 2006-2007 season, it was his breakout year. That's where he got everybody's attention when he posted a 2.0 goals against average and a .932 save percentage. Think about that ungodly number for a second. And then, mid-season, he got the call up to Montreal to be the backup. He was the backup to Cristobal Huet at first and then to Carey Price. And what happened? Along came the 2009 season, 2009-2010. Carey Price not playing so well, and Jaro Halak really having a stellar season. He goes into that playoff run as the number one goaltender. Jacques Martin made that decision. He played 18 games in that playoff. It all started with the Washington Capitals, right? The Capitals, number one seed in the NHL. Nobody gave the Canadiens a chance. What did Jaroslav Halak do? In Game 6, he stopped 53 shots. 53 for a guy who wasn't supposed to go anywhere in the National Hockey League. He got the Canadiens to Game 7, where they ultimately beat the Washington Capitals. Then, to add insult to injury, they went to the next round, where they faced off against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and did the exact same thing, winning that series in 7 games. So as the 8th seed that season, they knocked out 2 Stanley Cup favorites. Ultimately, they lost in the conference final, largely in part because the players didn't have any gas left in the tank after 2 grueling 7-game series. But the questions were there. People in Montreal were putting up graphics of a stop sign with the name Halak instead of stop on it. And the debate started. Do the Canadiens hold on to Halak and get rid of Price, or vice versa? There were naysayers on both sides. There were a lot of people saying, Carey Price played in the World Junior. Carey Price won a Calder Cup with the Hamilton Bulldogs. He's the next one. Halak could be a flash in the pan. Was he? The Canadiens had their blue chip prospect in goal. They weren't going to deviate from that plan. They ended up dealing Yarrow over to the St. Louis Blues in a trade that they got back Lars Eller, and they needed depth at center. So the value was there for both teams, right? But if you take a look at what happened after that series, the then GM of the Montreal Canadiens, Pierre Gauthier, who doesn't normally say nice things about players because he's a bit of an ass, and I know that because we grew up in the same neighborhood. In fact, he played minor league sports with my brothers and their friends, and nobody liked Pierre because he thought he knew everything. And that went on into his NHL career. Just ask Pierre Maguire when you get a couple of pints into him. But ultimately, Pierre Gauthier had this to say about Halak. Yarrow gave us a chance to win every night. He was calm under pressure, never rattled. That playoff run showed what kind of competitor he was. That's high praise from somebody who doesn't give it. And so Yarrow ended up leaving Montreal, going to St. Louis, where he ended up being a goalie under Ken Hitchcock. And Ken Hitchcock, as everybody knows, is a defensive-minded coach. What did he have to say about Jaroslav Halak? He was technically sound, mentally tough, and a guy you could always count on. He never complained. He just worked. And it didn't matter where he went in the National Hockey League, whether he was playing for Montreal, St. Louis, the New York Islanders, Vancouver Canucks, Boston, New York Rangers, and Washington Capitals, of course. Every single one of those teams said the same thing about Yarrow. He worked. He was quiet. And he was technically sound. Now, of course, even technically sound goaltenders have to make spectacular saves here and there. And Yarrow was up to the challenge. So think about it for a minute. 17 NHL seasons. You take a look at his career numbers, okay? He played in 581 NHL games. He won 295, 5 short of the 300 mark. And he had a .915 career save percentage, would get this, 53 shutouts. 9th round pick, 53 shutouts. And he worked with a lot of good NHL goalie coaches. He worked with Bob Essenza, Rolly Melanson, Ian Clark, Benoit Allaire, the brother of François Allaire, and of course, Marc Champagne. And all of them said the same thing about him. They praised him for his professionalism, his technical discipline, and his unshakable demeanor. Even though in that 2010 playoff run, who was it? It was Ovechkin that said that Halak was shaking when he was squeezing the bottle. Yeah, I think that's because you're trying to get the water out and you're squeezing it. It's not because he was nervous, because Halak never gave the impression that he was nervous at any time when he was between the pipes, whether it was Montreal or any other team. And, he did win a couple of Jennings trophies through his career, but he never won a Vezina, and he never won Olympic gold, right? Because Slovakia was never that team. But as he built a career on something much rarer than, all the accolades. He built it on consistency, character, because everybody loved his work ethic and the type of person that he was, family-oriented and such. And, of course, longevity. 17 years is nothing to scoff at. Never really had any major injuries. He did have bumps and bruises here and there, like any goaltender playing a butterfly style. But he was the kind of goalie teammates trusted and coaches relied on, game after game, year after year. And even his former teammate, Don Sweeney, had this to say: the perfect teammate, low maintenance, high character, and prepared for every game. You don't see that much from goaltenders nowadays, do you? At least I get the impression that a lot of goalies go into games just flash of the pan, not really seeing how the other team plays and depending a lot on their defense. Especially in that 2010 run, Halak learned not to depend on the people in front of him and to worry more about his own game and how he's going to react to different situations. He learned to do his homework about opponents, using video to see tendencies in players and game situations to give himself an advantage every time he stepped on the ice. It's those things that like goalies nowadays take for granted, but should do in order to be better on the ice. And I wrote a little blurb to kind of sum up Yaroslav's career in a nutshell. From Lewiston to Hamilton, from Montreal to Madison Square Garden, Halak's journey is a blueprint for every underdog who refuses to quit. And that's Jaroslav Halak. He never quit. He worked hard throughout his career, making the doubters change their mind and making the naysayers crawl under their rocks. He was that type of guy, firm in his beliefs, strong in his convictions, and he believed in himself, something a lot of people don't do these days. So today, after all is said and done, especially here in Montreal and that magical cup run that 15 years later people are still talking about, we want to say thank you to Jaroslav Halak for the saves, the silence in the storm, and the standard that he set. One that a lot of goaltenders should look at, as mentioned, as the blueprint for goaltenders in the National Hockey League. Enjoy your retirement. You've earned it. And on behalf of a lot of Habs fans, thank you, especially for 2010. Now, what do you think? Do you think the Canadiens should have gotten rid of Carey Price instead of Jaroslav Halak back in 2010? Would have changed the Canadiens' history? Could they have gotten more? Put it in the comments. And tell me what you thought about Jaroslav Halak. What kind of player did you see him as? I know a lot of people still love him to this day. I know Mark does. And so that's it for now. See you in the next episode.